They said the stallion was a demon, untamable, savage, a storm on 4 legs. At the auction, he broke free, scattering men like leaves, his hooves striking terror into the crowd. Guns were raised, chaos ruled, until silence fell. Before hundreds of stunned eyes, the wild horse bowed, lowering his head not to power, not to fear, but to a little girl no one expected. That was the moment everything changed. The summer sun rose slowly over Bitterroot Valley, painting the horizon in shades of gold and amber. The air shimmered with heat, though it was barely morning, and the wide dirt road leading to the county fairgrounds was already alive with the rattle of old trucks, the clatter of horse trailers, and the chatter of neighbors who rarely had reason to gather all in one place. Dust rose in lazy swirls beneath boots and hooves, drifting like a veil over the wooden fences and faded banners strung across the entrance gate. Emily Carter clung to her grandmother June's hand as they stepped off the gravel path. Her worn leather shoes scuffed the earth, and the smell of hay, sweat, and fried dough mingled in the air, creating a strange blend of festivity and tension. To anyone else, it was a cheerful Saturday, but to Emily, everything felt heavy, as though a storm lingered just beyond the ridgeline of the Bitterroot Mountains. At 8 years old, Emily had eyes too old for her age. They were wide and blue, filled with a kind of quiet wisdom that unsettled adults and made other children step back. Around her neck hung a small silver horseshoe charm, dulled by years but polished smooth where her grandfather's thumb had once rubbed it absent-mindedly. She never took it off. It was the last piece of him she had left. "Stay close, Em," Grandma June said, adjusting her sun hat against the glare. Her voice was roughened by years of worry and work, but her hand was warm and steady. "Crowds get wild when money's in the air." Emily nodded, though she was barely listening. Her gaze swept over the crowd, noticing the way people gathered in small circles, their voices lowered to excited whispers. She caught fragments of sentences: "wild stallion," "impossible to break," "came down from Bitterroot Ridge," "dangerous as sin." Her stomach tightened. She already knew what they were talking about. The wild horse. For weeks, talk had spread like wildfire through the valley of a massive black stallion caught in the mountains. No one had ever managed to rope him before, though generations of ranchers had tried. They said he moved like smoke, vanishing into the trees, impossible to pin down. But a week ago, McCoy's men had returned with him, battered and sweating, triumph stamped across their faces. And now, here he was, up for auction like any ordinary beast. Emily squeezed her necklace until the silver bit into her skin. Her grandfather would have hated this. The fairground stretched wide, with corrals set up in a rough semicircle and a wooden stage in the center for the auctioneer. Men in Stetsons leaned against the rails, calling out to one another, while women fanned themselves with church programs. Children darted between legs, chasing after each other, their laughter cutting sharp against the hum of adult conversation. Somewhere nearby, a fiddle played, adding a careless rhythm to the uneasy morning. "Grandma," Emily asked softly, "why did we come?" "We don't have money for anything." June hesitated before answering. Her weathered face, lined deep from years of sun and grief, turned toward her granddaughter. "Your grandfather never missed an auction. 30 years he came, rain or shine. I reckon we owe him to keep the tradition. And besides," she added in a whisper, "I need to speak with Mr. Turner about work at his supply store." "Every dollar matters these days." Emily nodded, though her throat felt tight. She hated the way people stared at them. Everyone in Bitterroot knew the Carters had lost their ranch the year before. After her grandfather's accident in the mountains, debts piled up faster than her grandmother could pay them. The land, their land, had been seized and sold cheap to William McCoy, the wealthiest and most ruthless rancher in the county. It was McCoy's name that echoed in every corner of their loss, his shadow that stretched over every part of their lives. A shout rose from the far corral. Emily turned quickly, her heart pounding. There, behind heavy reinforced rails, stood the stallion. He was nothing like she had imagined. Bigger, darker, more alive. His coat shimmered like polished obsidian under the sun, each muscle rolling with barely contained power. His mane streamed wild down his neck, tangled yet beautiful, and his eyes, black as night, scanned the crowd with a fury that made grown men flinch. He struck the ground with one massive hoof, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and the boards of the corral quivered. "Lord Almighty," someone muttered nearby. "That's no horse. That's a devil on 4 legs." But Emily didn't see a devil. She saw fear. She saw confusion. And she saw something else, something that tightened her chest so fiercely she couldn't breathe. Loneliness. The stallion tossed his head, nostrils flaring, as if he too could feel every eye upon him. His sides heaved with quick breaths, and when one of McCoy's men cracked a whip near the rails, he lunged, teeth bared, sending the man stumbling backward in terror. Laughter and jeers erupted from the crowd, but Emily's fists clenched. "Stop it," she whispered, though no one heard. Her grandmother tugged gently at her sleeve. "Don't stare too hard, Em. Nothing good comes from crossing paths with something that wild." But Emily couldn't look away. The silver charm pressed warm against her skin, and her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Horses are like people, Em. They got souls, and souls weren't made for cages." The auctioneer's bell clanged, drawing the crowd toward the stage. The first lots were rolled out, docile mares, a few steers, wagons of supplies. Prices rose quickly, men waving paddles, the chant of the auctioneer ringing like a hymn of greed. Emily tried to listen, tried to care, but her gaze kept drifting back to the corral where the stallion paced endlessly, circling like a caged storm. And then, with a voice that carried over the crowd, the auctioneer boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, our special lot of the day." The wild stallion of Bitterroot Ridge, captured by none other than McCoy ranch hands, a pure force of nature, untamed and unmatched. The crowd surged forward, pressing against the rails, anticipation sparking like fire. Emily's pulse raced. She felt the moment tighten around her like a noose. Something was about to happen. The auctioneer's voice still rang in Emily's ears as the crowd pressed closer to the rails. Men leaned forward, their hats tipped back, women shielded their eyes from the glare of the Montana sun, and children balanced on the edges of crates to catch a better glimpse. The wild stallion, his black coat blazing like fire in the harsh light, paced the corral with a restless fury. He struck the ground again and again, as if the earth itself had offended him. Emily's small fingers tightened around the silver horseshoe charm at her neck. The cool metal had warmed under her skin, pulsing as though alive. She thought of her grandfather, his slow smile, the way his voice carried when he spoke of the mountains. He had always said the Bitterroot Peaks were alive, whispering to those who cared enough to listen. That was before the accident, before the debts and the foreclosure, before McCoy had swept in like a hawk and taken everything. Her grandmother's hand trembled as she placed it gently on Emily's shoulder. "Don't look so hard, Em," she murmured, her voice low but firm. "Nothing good comes from locking eyes with a wild thing. Remember what happened to your grandfather?" Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to ask, what really happened? The town called it an accident, a slip on wet rock, a fall into the ravine. But she had overheard hushed voices late at night, whispers her grandmother tried to bury. Men muttering that William McCoy had reason to push old Carter out of the way, that he wanted the north pasture for more than cattle. Every time Emily tried to ask, her grandmother shut her down with a sharp, "Enough." Yet the shadow of doubt clung to the girl like the dust of the valley. As the bidding began, Emily's gaze drifted, not to the crowd, but inward, to the memory of her grandfather standing tall in his faded denim jacket, the silver chain glinting against his chest, where the charm now rested on hers. She remembered his voice on their last ride together. "You listen with your heart, not just your ears. A horse will tell you everything if you're quiet enough." The chant of the auctioneer snapped her back. $500. Do I hear 6? 600. 7. Come on, gentlemen. This beast is like no other you've ever seen. His words cut like a knife through the air, stirring greed in the crowd. The stallion lunged, his hooves slamming into the wooden rails. The boards groaned but held. A ripple of unease passed through the spectators, but the bidding only grew louder. Men shouted numbers as though daring one another. McCoy himself leaned casually against the far fence, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow across his face. His smile was thin, his eyes sharp, never leaving the stallion. Or Emily. June Carter stiffened beside her granddaughter. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered. "This isn't for us. Your grandfather would—" She broke off, her voice cracking. Emily reached for her grandmother's hand, squeezing it tight. "He would want us to be here," the girl said softly. "He never missed an auction." The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, the years of hardship melted from her face, replaced by a raw grief she rarely let slip. "He believed in things," she whispered. "He believed horses had souls. That freedom was worth more than money. That's what cost him his life." Emily's breath caught. The words were quiet, nearly lost in the auctioneer's chant, but they struck like a thunderclap. She wanted to ask, to demand the truth, but the moment passed as June turned her face back to the stage, hiding the tears glistening in her eyes. The stallion reared suddenly, his mane flying, a scream tearing from his throat that silenced the crowd. For an instant, Emily swore she saw something more than fury in his eyes. It was not just rage, not just fear. It was sorrow. Deep and old, like the mountains themselves. Her heart lurched. She could almost hear her grandfather's voice layered over the cry. "They've got souls, Em. Don't ever forget." The bidding faltered. Men shifted uneasily, some lowering their paddles. McCoy's smile faltered just enough for Emily to notice. He whispered something to one of his ranch hands, who nodded and slipped away through the crowd. Emily shivered, though the sun burned hot on her skin. She tugged at her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma," she whispered, "do you think he knows?" June frowned. "Knows what, child?" "That horse," Emily said, her eyes fixed on the restless black shape in the corral. Do you think he knows he's not supposed to be here? That he belongs up there, in the mountains? She lifted her chin toward the jagged horizon, where the Bitterroot peaks cut sharp against the sky. For a long moment, June didn't answer. Then she sighed, a sound heavy with both pride and sadness. Your grandfather thought so. He used to say some creatures aren't meant to be tamed. Maybe he was right. The stallion screamed again, thrashing against the ropes, and the auctioneer raised his voice above the din. Ladies and gentlemen, who will claim this legend of the Bitterroot? Do I hear 1,000? The crowd roared, hands shot up, numbers flew. Emily pressed closer to the rail, her breath shallow, her heart hammering. She didn't know why, but she felt bound to that horse, as though invisible threads pulled her toward him. She could almost swear his dark eyes met hers across the distance, holding her captive. And in that gaze, she thought she saw her grandfather's shadow. The chant of the auctioneer climbed higher, his voice like a hammer striking the crowd, pounding numbers into the hot Montana air. 1,000! Do I hear 12? 1,200, yes sir. 14, 1,500, come now folks, this is a once-in-a-lifetime beast. His words wrapped the crowd in fever, greed flashing in men's eyes as they jostled for position along the rails. Inside the corral, the stallion had become a storm in flesh. His muscles coiled and rippled as he twisted against the ropes. Dust rose in great clouds, coating the faces of those who dared lean too close. His breath came in wild bursts, nostrils flared, foam flecking his dark muzzle. When he reared, the sky seemed to darken behind him, the jagged silhouette of the Bitterroot Mountains framed like a prophecy. Emily clutched the railing with both hands, the wood biting into her palms. Her grandmother called her name, but the sound drowned in the chaos. Her eyes locked on the horse, her heart beating in rhythm with his hooves. She could feel the crowd pressing in around her, the weight of hundreds of eyes demanding that this wild soul be bought, sold, and broken. And then it happened. A ranch hand, sweat dripping from his brow, cracked a whip to push the stallion closer to the show gate. The snap echoed like gunfire. The horse screamed, a piercing sound that cut straight through Emily's chest. He lunged forward, striking the gate with both front hooves. The wooden beam, already weakened from his earlier assaults, split with a sound like thunder. The world exploded. The stallion surged through the opening, wood splintering around him. He bolted into the arena, a living avalanche of fury and fear. The auctioneer's chant shattered mid-word. Shouts erupted as men scrambled, women shrieked, children cried. Benches toppled, hats flew, and the fairgrounds dissolved into chaos. Emily was thrown sideways as bodies surged for the exits. She hit the ground, grit scraping her knees, the world spinning in a blur of boots and skirts. She scrambled upright, coughing on the dust, just in time to see the black stallion whirl in the open ring, his eyes rolling white, his mane a whip of shadow. Two cowboys flung ropes, but he twisted like smoke, the lassos slicing empty air. Another man swung a chair as if it were a lion tamer's whip, only to be knocked flat when the horse charged, hooves pounding inches from his head. Panic rippled outward, sending people crashing into one another as they tried to flee. "Shoot him!" William McCoy's voice cut through the din like a blade. He stood on the auction platform, red-faced with fury, pointing toward the animal. "Before he kills someone!" A rifle appeared in a man's hands, the barrel glinting in the sun. Emily's stomach dropped. She wanted to scream, but the words stuck like stones in her throat. The stallion froze for the briefest instant, his ears pricked, his eyes scanning. Dust swirled around him, wrapping his body in a shroud. And then, those eyes found Emily. The world narrowed to that single connection. The crowd, the shouts, the raised gun, all of it blurred away. His gaze locked on hers, dark and unyielding, and she felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. Her heartbeat matched his breathing. Her fear melted into something else. Recognition. Her lips moved before she realized she was speaking. "It's all right," she whispered, though the words were lost in the roar. "You're not alone." The stallion's massive chest heaved. He pawed the ground, tossing his head, his whole body taut with energy. For a terrifying second, Emily thought he might charge her too. But then, impossibly, he sank down. One knee bent, then the other, until the great black horse knelt before her in the dust. Silence fell. The gun lowered. The crowd's shouts caught in their throats. All that remained was the image of a wild creature bowed in front of a child, his head dipping as if offering surrender. Emily, trembling but steady, stepped forward. Her hand reached out, crossing the space between them. She touched his muzzle. Warm, damp, alive. His breath rushed against her palm, not as fury, but as trust. Gasps rippled through the spectators. A woman crossed herself. A man muttered, "Never seen the like." McCoy's face twisted, a storm of rage and calculation. This was no ordinary scene. It was a spectacle that would spread through every corner of Montana by sundown. Emily's grandmother finally reached her, grabbing her shoulders and pulling her back. "Emily! Dear God, what are you doing?" But the girl's eyes never left the horse. Even as June clutched her close, Emily knew something unspoken had just passed between them, something no one else could ever understand. The stallion stayed kneeling a moment longer, then rose with a snort that sent dust scattering. He turned, circling Emily once, and then stood as still as a monument, head lowered, as if waiting. McCoy found his voice again, though it shook with fury. "That horse is mine," he bellowed, "and no little girl changes that." His words rolled over the stunned crowd, but they felt hollow against the sight before them. Emily pressed her hand to her necklace, her grandfather's charm burning against her chest. She whispered into the dust and silence, not caring if anyone heard. "Your name is Storm." The stallion flicked his ears, and for an instant Emily swore she saw a flicker of understanding. The Kuan fairgrounds had never been so still. Dust hung in the air like smoke, the smell of sweat and fear clinging to the silence. Men who only minutes earlier had shouted bids now stood frozen, their paddles dangling uselessly at their sides. Women clutched their children, wide-eyed, whispering prayers under their breath. All of them stared at the impossible scene. A wild stallion, untamed and feared, kneeling before a girl no older than 8. Emily's hand rested against the stallion's muzzle. The heat of his breath curled across her skin, quick and uneven, but no longer violent. His dark eyes, once blazing with panic, now glimmered with something softer, something she couldn't name. Her heart thundered, yet she felt no fear. For the first time since her grandfather's death, she felt safe, as though he were standing right beside her. Her grandmother June was trembling, her grip tight on Emily's shoulders. "We have to leave," she whispered fiercely. "This isn't natural, Em." "It isn't safe." But Emily shook her head, her gaze never leaving the stallion. "He's not dangerous," she said softly. "He's scared. He just wants to go home." The words carried farther than she intended. The nearest men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Some nodded, almost reluctantly, as if admitting the child had seen something they had not. Others scoffed, unwilling to let go of their fear. From the auction platform, William McCoy's voice rang out, slicing through the silence. "Enough of this foolishness!" His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes glittered with rage. "That horse belongs to me, and no child's trick will change that fact." He raised his arm, signaling to his men. Two ranch hands moved forward cautiously, ropes coiled in their fists. The stallion's ears flicked back. His body tensed, a ripple of muscle running down his shoulders, but he did not bolt. Instead, he remained still, his head slightly lowered, his gaze locked on Emily. She placed both hands against his cheek. "It's all right," she murmured, barely a breath. "I'm here." The ranch hands hesitated. They had seen the stallion crush fence posts and throw grown men like dolls. Now, faced with the sight of him calm under a child's touch, their courage faltered. One glanced at McCoy, who snarled and motioned again. "Do it!" McCoy barked. But before they could move, another voice cut across the arena. "Hold on, Bill." It was Jack Nolan, the town's veterinarian. He stepped out from the crowd, tall and lean, his weathered face set with quiet authority. "You put another hand on that horse right now, you'll have blood on your hands." McCoy's jaw tightened. "Stay out of this, Nolan. This is my property, and I'll handle it how I see fit." Jack ignored him. His gaze went to Emily. "Step back, honey," he said gently. "Let's not push him." Emily didn't move. Her small hands remained on the stallion's face. "He's not going to hurt me," she said with a certainty that silenced even the skeptical murmurs of the crowd. "He trusts me." Gasps rippled again. Some spectators whispered about miracles, others about curses. The weight of the moment pressed heavy on everyone's chest. Finally, the stallion exhaled. A long, shuddering sigh. He lowered his head further, almost bowing, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the entire valley bowed with him. Emily smiled faintly. "Storm," she whispered, testing the name aloud. "Your name is Storm." The stallion flicked an ear, a soft snort leaving his nostrils as if answering. McCoy's fury boiled over. He slammed his hat against his thigh. "Enough. Tie him down, or I swear." But Jack raised his hand sharply. "You do that, and you'll have to answer to this town." Everyone here saw what just happened. That's no beast, Bill. That's a soul. And you can't put a price tag on that. The crowd stirred. Men and women exchanged glances. Some nodded, emboldened by Jack's words, while others stepped back, unwilling to challenge McCoy openly. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and McCoy knew it. Emily's grandmother pulled her away at last, her arms wrapped protectively around the girl. Yet Emily twisted in her grasp, her eyes never leaving Storm. As the ranch hands finally threw ropes over the horse's neck, Storm resisted for the briefest moment, then stilled, his gaze following Emily until he was led back toward the reinforced pen. The silence fractured into scattered conversations, the crowd buzzing with speculation. Some spoke of destiny, others of witchcraft. But all agreed on one thing. What they had witnessed would not be forgotten. McCoy, his face a mask of forced calm, adjusted his hat and raised his voice once more. "The auction continues," he declared. "This horse will be sold, as planned." But even as he spoke, his eyes cut toward Emily, sharp and calculating. Emily pressed the silver charm to her chest. She could feel the weight of McCoy's stare, but she refused to look away. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. By the time the sun dipped behind the Bitterroot Mountains, the fairgrounds had emptied into silence. Only a few scattered scraps of paper and trampled cups littered the dirt, reminders of the chaos that had shaken the town. The wild stallion, Storm, as Emily had dared to call him, was locked again behind the reinforced pen. Men lingered near the corral, muttering, their faces still pale with disbelief at what they'd witnessed. Emily and her grandmother walked home along the dirt road, their shadows stretching long against the orange glow of dusk. June's grip on Emily's hand was tight, her pace brisk. She hadn't spoken since leaving the fairgrounds, not even when neighbors tried to stop her with questions. It wasn't until the flicker of lamplight from their cabin came into view that she finally exhaled, her shoulders sagging with the weight of the day. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and old coffee. June dropped her shawl on the chair and turned sharply toward Emily. "What you did today was dangerous," she said, her voice trembling with anger that masked fear. "Do you understand? That horse could have killed you." Emily's eyes were steady, though her small hands curled against her skirt. "He wouldn't." "He knew me." "Emily," June snapped, then stopped herself. She sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "I can't lose you too." The room fell into a fragile silence. Emily stood by the window, the silver charm pressing against her chest as if it carried her grandfather's heartbeat. Outside, the twilight deepened into purple shadow, the mountains dark and brooding. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried. A knock rattled the door. June tensed. "Stay back," she whispered, rising carefully. She opened the door only a crack. On the porch stood William McCoy, his hat low, his figure filling the frame like a shadow made flesh. "Evenin', June," he drawled, his voice smooth but edged with steel. "Mind if I step in?" June stiffened, blocking the doorway. "We're not taking visitors tonight." McCoy's smile didn't reach his eyes. "After what happened today, I'd say you don't have much choice." His gaze slid past her shoulder, finding Emily in the dim room. "That little stunt your granddaughter pulled, that'll cost me money. And I don't like losing money." June's jaw tightened. "She's a child." "She's a spectacle," McCoy corrected, his voice sharpening. "And spectacles sell. There's men already sniffing around with offers. Circuses, traveling shows, folks who'll pay handsomely to see a girl who can tame a demon horse with a touch. You think I won't cash in on that?" Emily stepped forward before her grandmother could stop her. "I'm not for sale." The air in the cabin went still. McCoy's eyes narrowed, studying the girl. For a heartbeat, something almost like surprise flickered across his face. Then he chuckled low, shaking his head. "You've got fire, I'll give you that. Just like your granddaddy." And look where it got him, June's breath caught. "Don't you dare!" But McCoy tipped his hat and leaned closer to the doorway, his words a hiss meant for both of them. "The mountains keep their secrets, but I know what Carter found up there before his fall. And I'll make sure those secrets stay mine. You keep meddling, girl, you'll end up just like him." With that, he turned and strode into the night, boots crunching against the gravel until the sound vanished. Emily stood frozen, her chest rising and falling too quickly. June slammed the door shut and slid the bolt, her hands trembling. The lamplight flickered, throwing long, jagged shadows across the walls. "Grandma," Emily whispered, her voice thin. "What did he mean about Grandpa?" June pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening. "Not tonight, Em." But Emily couldn't let it go. The way McCoy had said it, the sly twist of his smile, the certainty in his tone, it burrowed under her skin. She turned toward the small shelf in the corner, where her grandfather's old notebook lay tucked between dusty Bibles and weathered seed catalogs. She had found it once before, its pages filled with sketches of mountains and notes about water springs. Tonight, the book seemed to glow with a weight she had never noticed. Later, when her grandmother finally dozed in the rocking chair, Emily crept across the room and pulled the notebook free. She lit a candle, shielding the flame with her hand, and opened to the last page. The words stopped abruptly mid-sentence, scrawled in hurried ink. "If I don't make it back, trust the mountains. The truth lies where the wind speaks." Her heart thudded. McCoy had known something her grandfather had tried to protect. And now Storm, the wild horse, was at the center of it all. Emily closed the notebook, her resolve hardening. She would not let McCoy silence her grandfather's truth. She would not let Storm be broken, sold, or destroyed. As the candle burned low, the girl whispered to the darkness, "He chose me, and I'll choose him outside." Unseen in the shadows near the fence line, a figure lingered. One of McCoy's men, sent to watch. He spat into the dirt, pulled his hat low, and melted back into the night, leaving only the sound of the wind rattling the pines. Morning came gray and restless over Bitterroot Valley. A thin mist clung to the fields, the mountains half-veiled as though reluctant to reveal themselves. Inside the Carter cabin, Emily sat at the kitchen table with her grandfather's notebook spread before her. The paper smelled faintly of dust and pine, edges worn soft from years of handling. She traced the ink with her finger, the words like a secret voice calling from the past. June moved quietly behind her, spooning coffee into a chipped enamel pot. She hadn't spoken much since McCoy's visit the night before, but the lines on her face had deepened, and her hands shook as she poured the water. Emily knew better than to press her, but the silence weighed heavy. The notebook was filled with sketches, rough outlines of mountain ridges, winding streams, symbols Emily didn't understand. Some pages were crowded with notes in hurried script, measurements, directions, fragments of thought. Over and over, her grandfather had circled the same words: North pasture, springs beneath, protect the land. Emily bit her lip. The North pasture. That was the piece McCoy had taken first when the ranch slipped into debt. It was barren on the surface, rocky and dry. People laughed when her grandfather insisted it was the most valuable land they had. But what if he had been right? A sudden knock on the door startled them both. June froze, her eyes flicking toward Emily. She set the coffee pot down without a word and went to the door. This time, it wasn't McCoy. It was Jack Nolan. His tall frame filled the doorway, his hat in his hands, eyes shadowed with concern. "Morning, June." "Emily," he greeted softly. "I thought I'd check in after yesterday. Half the town's still talking about it." June hesitated before stepping aside. "Come in, Jack. But make it quick. We don't need more eyes on this house." He entered, his boots thudding softly on the wood floor. His gaze fell immediately to the notebook on the table. "That belonged to Carter, didn't it?" Emily nodded. "It's all I have of him. But I think it's more than just notes." Jack pulled up a chair, flipping the book carefully, as though it might fall apart in his hands. He studied the sketches, his brow furrowing. He was mapping water sources, he murmured. "See here? These lines mark underground flows. I've seen charts like this before, from geologists. Your grandfather wasn't guessing. He knew. Emily leaned closer. Knew what? That McCoy's pasture isn't barren at all, Jack said grimly. There's a spring under it. Maybe more than one. If tapped, it could supply the whole valley. Water's worth more than gold around here, especially when summers keep getting drier. Carter must have found proof. June's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. And that's why McCoy wanted him out of the way. The silence that followed was sharp as a knife. Emily swallowed hard, her chest aching. The pieces were falling together. Her grandfather's sudden death, McCoy's hunger for the land, his threats whispered in the night. Jack closed the notebook and set it gently back in front of Emily. This is dangerous knowledge, Em. If McCoy knows you have it, he won't stop until he takes it. Or worse. Emily straightened her back, her small fists clenched. Then I won't let him know. But I can't ignore it, either. Grandpa wanted me to find this. He wanted me to protect it. June reached across the table, her hand trembling as she covered Emily's. He wanted to protect you, child. That's all he ever wanted. The moment was broken by the faint sound of hooves outside. Jack stiffened, rising quickly. Through the window, Emily saw riders in the distance, McCoy's men, patrolling near the edge of their property. They lingered for a while before turning back toward town, but the message was clear. They were being watched. Jack lowered his voice. Listen, you can't fight McCoy head-on, but you do have something he doesn't. A bond with that horse. Storm might be your only chance to stand against him. Emily's heart leapt at the name. She thought of the stallion kneeling, his eyes finding hers in the chaos. She thought of the way he had stilled under her hand, as if he'd been waiting for her all along. June shook her head sharply. Absolutely not. She's a child, Jack. I won't let her risk her life with that animal. Jack's eyes softened. I'm not saying it'll be easy. But maybe Carter saw something in her too. Maybe that's why the horse chose her. If Storm trusts Emily, then maybe she can finish what her grandfather started. Emily pressed the notebook to her chest, her mind racing. She remembered the final words scribbled across the last page. The truth lies where the wind speaks. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but she knew this much. Her grandfather had left her a trail, and Storm was part of it. That night, as June dozed once more in the rocker, Emily slipped outside. The air was cool, the stars scattered bright above the mountains. She held the notebook tight and whispered into the dark. I'll find it, Grandpa. Whatever secret you left, I'll find it, and Storm will help me. From the far distance came the faintest sound of a whinny, carried on the night wind. Emily's heart pounded. She didn't know if it was real or just her imagination, but it felt like an answer. By the time the sun climbed high above the valley the next day, whispers had already spread through Bitterroot. Folks gathered outside the feed store and along the wooden boardwalks, voices low but urgent. Emily caught fragments as she and June walked through town for supplies. McCoy brought in a man, not local, mean as a rattlesnake. Others just shook their heads, eyes dark with unease. At first, Emily thought it was just another rumor, like so many that swirled after the auction. But when they turned the corner onto Main Street, she saw him. He was standing outside McCoy's office, his back straight as a post, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. He wasn't dressed like the ranchers, no dusty Stetson or worn boots. Instead, his clothes were sharp, a long, dark coat despite the summer heat, polished boots, a hat with a narrow brim pulled low. His face was angular, pale against the sun, and his eyes, hard, gray, calculating, swept the street like a predator scanning for prey. "That's him," someone muttered nearby. "Marcus Reed." From back east. Breaks horses for the army, they say. Breaks men, too. If the money's right, Emily felt a chill even in the warm morning. Reed didn't look at her directly, but when his gaze swept past, it felt like being measured, weighed, and dismissed all at once. He flicked the ash from his cigarette, then stepped into McCoy's office without a word. June tightened her grip on Emily's hand. "We get our flour, and we leave," she whispered. "No lingering." Inside the general store, the air was thick with kerosene and spices. Mr. Turner bagged their purchases quickly, his eyes darting toward the window, as though afraid Reed might appear there too. When they left, Emily noticed townsfolk crossing to the other side of the street to avoid McCoy's building. Fear clung to the air like smoke. That evening, as dusk settled over the valley, Emily slipped from the cabin and made her way to the fairgrounds. Jack Nolan had promised to meet her by the corral, and though her grandmother had begged her to stay inside, she couldn't. Storm was there, locked away, and now this Marcus Reed threatened to tear apart everything fragile she had begun to build with the stallion. The fairgrounds were quieter than before, but not empty. Torches cast flickering light across the dirt as men worked around the corral. At the center, Reed stood with a whip coiled in his hand. Storm paced the pen, his muscles slick with sweat, his sides lathered from hours of being run in circles. His cries were raw, each one stabbing into Emily's chest like a blade. Reed raised the whip and snapped it sharply, the crack splitting the night air. Storm reared, slamming against the boards. Reed didn't flinch. His voice was low, cold, each word precise. "You will break." They all break. Emily's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to run to Storm, but Jack's hand caught her shoulder in the shadows. "Not now," he whispered. "If McCoy sees you, he'll use it against you." Emily's eyes burned with tears. "He's hurting him." Jack's jaw tightened. "I know. Reed's methods are cruel. He believes pain forces obedience, but Storm isn't like other horses. He'll fight until he dies before he bows to that man." Storm crashed against the fence again, and the boards groaned in protest. Reed watched with a thin smile, then motioned for McCoy, who stood nearby with his arms folded, smug and certain. "This horse is money," Reed said flatly, "and money bends to the whip." "Give me a week." McCoy's grin widened. "You've got 3 days." Emily trembled, rage flooding her small body. But beneath the anger was something else. A fierce certainty that Storm would never belong to Reed, or to McCoy, or to anyone but himself. She pressed her hand to her silver charm, whispering a promise to the night. As they slipped away into the dark, Jack bent low to her ear. "Emily, you have something Reed doesn't. He'll use force, but you have trust. If you want to save that horse, you'll need to prove it, not just to the town, but to McCoy himself." Emily lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. "Then I will." Behind them, Reed's whip cracked again, and Storm's scream tore through the valley. But Emily didn't flinch. She carried the sound like a battle cry, a reminder that the fight was far from over. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the valley washed clean by a night wind that had rattled the windows and whispered through the pines. Emily woke early, her grandfather's notebook still under her pillow, as if its pages might guard her dreams. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake her grandmother, and slipped out into the cool dawn. Jack was waiting by the edge of the dirt road, reins in hand. Beside him stood a woman Emily had never met before. She was tall and graceful, her dark braid streaked with silver. her eyes calm and steady as the mountains themselves. She wore a simple denim shirt, but around her neck hung a pendant of carved stone, shaped like a feather. "This is Evelyn Greyhawk," Jack said, his tone carrying respect. "She's Salish. Knows these lands better than anyone, and she knows horses in ways most folks have forgotten." Evelyn inclined her head, her voice smooth as river water. "Your grandfather and I were friends." He understood the old ways. He listened. Her gaze settled on Emily, soft but piercing. "And you? Storm listened to you when no one else could." "That means something." Emily's throat tightened. She clutched the silver charm at her neck. "I didn't do anything. He just looked at me." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Sometimes that is enough." They walked together toward the edge of the fairgrounds, keeping low behind the cottonwoods. The corral where Storm was kept was guarded, but in the early light most of McCoy's men had drifted off for breakfast. From the shadows, Emily saw him again, restless, pacing, his coat dark with sweat, his mane tangled from Reed's merciless drills. Her chest ached. "They're hurting him." "Yes," Evelyn said quietly, "and the more he fights, the harder they'll try to break him." That's the way of men who only understand control. She knelt in the dirt, drawing lines with a twig. "But Storm doesn't need control. He needs recognition. If you want him to trust you, you must speak in a language older than whips and ropes." Emily crouched beside her, eyes wide. "How?" "Through silence," Evelyn replied. "Through breath. Through stillness. Horses are prey animals. Their first question to everything is, 'Are you safe?' If you answer with fear, they flee. If you answer with anger, they fight. But if you answer with calm, they will stand beside you." Jack nodded. "I've seen it myself. The best trainers know you don't force a horse. You invite him." Emily's small brow furrowed. "But how do I do that?" Evelyn placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Start with your breath. When you're near him, breathe slow, steady, like the wind moving through grass. Don't chase him. Don't demand. Just be there, patient, until he chooses you again." The words settled in Emily's chest like seeds. She turned her eyes back to Storm, who had stopped pacing and was watching them from across the pen. Even from a distance, his gaze locked on hers, as though he had heard every word. That evening, when the guards were thinner and Reed had left for town, Jack and Evelyn brought Emily close to the pen. Storm's ears flicked forward, his nostrils flaring, a low snort rolling from his chest. Emily stepped slowly, her hands open at her sides. She remembered Evelyn's words. "Breathe like the wind." She drew a long inhale, then let it out softly, her shoulders loose, step by step. She closed the distance. Storm pawed the dirt, his muscles tense, but he didn't bolt. She stopped just beyond the fence, lowering her eyes slightly so she wouldn't appear as a predator. "It's me," she whispered. "Emily." Storm blew through his nose, tossing his head, but he didn't turn away. His great body quivered like a drawn bowstring, yet he stayed. Emily exhaled again, slow and even, until her breath matched his rhythm. For a long, trembling moment, nothing else existed, just the quiet pulse of two beings sharing air. Then, to her astonishment, Storm lowered his head. Not fully, not like before, but enough to show he was listening. Tears pricked Emily's eyes. She wanted to reach out, to touch him, but she remembered Evelyn's warning. Don't chase. Don't demand. So she stayed still, her palms open, her breath steady. Behind her, Evelyn's voice was soft. Good. Don't rush him. Trust takes time. The spell broke when one of McCoy's men came stomping back with a lantern, cursing about misplaced tack. Storm jolted, his head snapping up, muscles coiling tight. Emily stepped back quickly into the shadows with Jack and Evelyn, her heart pounding. As they walked home under the rising moon, Evelyn laid a hand on Emily's shoulder. You have something rare, child. Storm sees you not as a captor, not as a threat, but as a companion. That bond is your strength. Hold it, protect it, and it may change everything. Emily nodded, clutching her silver charm. She felt it burn warm against her skin, as if her grandfather were walking beside her in the starlit dark. Storm's scream split the night air. Emily jerked awake, her heart hammering, certain the sound had traveled miles through the valley. She rushed to the window, pressing her face against the cool glass. Far off, under the lantern glow of the fairgrounds, she saw Storm thrashing, slamming against the boards of his pen. Shadows moved frantically around him, McCoy's men shouting, Marcus Reed standing calm in the chaos, a whip curled in one hand. Emily grabbed her boots and darted for the door. June stirred in her rocker, half asleep. Where are you? Storm, Emily gasped. Something's wrong. She didn't wait for an answer. The dirt road blurred under her feet as she ran, lungs burning, her silver charm bouncing against her chest. By the time she reached the fence line, Jack Nolan was already there, crouched low in the shadows. He caught her arm before she could run out into the open. Stay down, Em, he whispered harshly. Look. Together they watched. Storm's body heaved, his eyes rolling white, foam dripping thick from his mouth. He bucked violently, nearly toppling the corral posts. Yet his movements were strange, wild but unfocused, as though his mind and body had been split apart. What's happening to him? Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Jack's jaw clenched. They've doped him. Emily blinked. Doped? Injected him with stimulants. Makes him burn out fast, mind clouded, body on fire. Reed's forcing exhaustion. He wants to strip Storm of every ounce of fight until he collapses. Jack's voice was tight with fury. It's a cruel man's trick. Brake's weaker horses in daze, Emily's stomach churned. She could see Reed standing in the torchlight, his gray eyes glinting as he watched Storm stumble and crash against the rails. He wasn't training. He was dismantling. I have to stop it, Emily said, surging forward. Jack caught her arm again. You run out there now. McCoy will use it against you. You'll only make Storm suffer more. We need proof, not just anger. Storm screamed again, collapsing to his knees before lurching back up. Emily pressed her fist to her mouth, tears blurring her vision. She wanted to climb the fence, to throw herself in front of Reed, to shout until the mountains split open. Instead, she dropped to her knees in the dirt, pulling the silver charm into her hands. Storm, she whispered to the wind. It's me. Hold on. Please hold on. Perhaps it was foolish, but as she breathed, slow and steady the way Evelyn had taught her, she swore the stallion hesitated. His sides still heaved, his body still shuddered, but his head tilted slightly toward the shadows where she knelt. His gaze, wild, burning, locked with hers, and for a heartbeat the noise of the world vanished. Reed snapped the whip, breaking the moment. Storm lunged again, crashing into the boards, splinters flying. McCoy shouted something Emily couldn't hear, and the men closed in with ropes. Storm's body convulsed, his legs tangling, until finally, with a guttural cry, he collapsed onto his side. Dust exploded around him, the earth trembling beneath the weight of his fall. Emily's scream was silent, lodged deep in her chest. She wanted to run to him, but Jack held her fast, his face pale and grim. "Not now," he said hoarsely. "We'll get him through this." But not tonight. The men dragged Storm back to his feet, forcing him upright with ropes and shouts. His body swayed, barely balanced, his eyes dull from the poison coursing through him. Reed stood close, one hand pressed to Storm's neck, as if claiming ownership. Then, satisfied, he motioned for the men to leave the horse tied until morning. When the torches dimmed and the fairgrounds quieted, Jack led Emily back toward the cover of the trees. She was trembling so hard she could barely walk. "They're killing him," she whispered. Jack crouched before her, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me. They think this will break him, but Storm isn't ordinary. If anyone can survive Reed's cruelty, it's him. And if anyone can pull him back from the edge, it's you." Emily's tears streaked down her cheeks. "What if I'm too late?" Jack shook his head firmly. "Then he wouldn't have knelt for you. He wouldn't have chosen you. Hold to that, Emily. Hold it like your life depends on it. Because his does." That night, back at the cabin, Emily couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring toward the faint glow of the fair grounds. She pressed her grandfather's notebook to her chest, whispering his words. "The truth lies where the wind speaks." The wind rustled through the pines, carrying with it the faintest sound, a low, pained whinny. Emily closed her eyes, her fists tight. "I'll save you, Storm. I swear it." By the end of the week, the town was buzzing louder than a hive. Word of the wild stallion kneeling before a child had traveled far beyond Bitterroot. Ranchers from neighboring valleys, traders from the city, and curious onlookers all poured in, filling the boardwalks, the saloon, and every spare bed in town. What had once been a local auction had become a spectacle, a story no one wanted to miss. At the center of it all was William McCoy. He walked the streets with his hat tipped low and a grin that stretched too wide. He had turned gossip into gold, every rumor feeding his pockets. Yet behind that grin lay fury, for the sight of Emily standing beside Storm had rattled him in ways he couldn't admit. It was during one of these crowded afternoons, in front of the saloon where men were wagering over dice, that McCoy made his announcement. He stepped onto the wooden porch, his voice booming across the street. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, raising his hands for silence, "in 1 week's time, at the opening of our summer festival, I'll put this nonsense to rest. The girl claims the horse chose her? Then let her prove it. In front of all of you?" The crowd murmured, curious, expectant. McCoy's eyes cut through the throng, finding Emily where she stood with June and Jack. His smile sharpened. "If the girl can mount that stallion and ride him before the crowd, the beast is hers. If not, he's mine, and I'll see him sold to the highest bidder by sundown." The street erupted in shouts. Some laughed, clapping their neighbors on the back. Others gasped at the audacity. Wagers flew instantly, some betting on the girl, most against. Emily froze, the weight of every gaze pressing on her. Her grandmother's grip on her arm tightened painfully. "Absolutely not," June hissed. "She's a child, McCoy." You can't, but McCoy cut her off with a lazy wave. It's fair. The people want a show. Let them have one. If she truly has the gift, let her prove it. His voice dropped, low and venomous. Unless you're afraid. Jack stepped forward, his voice sharp. This is exploitation, McCoy. You're risking her life for your greed. McCoy's grin never faltered. Life is risk, Nolan. And if you've got nothing worth risking, you've got nothing worth keeping. Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to say no, to hide from the hungry eyes of the crowd. But then she thought of Storm. Drugged, beaten, chained. She thought of her grandfather's notebook and the words scrawled in fading ink. Protect the land. She thought of Storm lowering his head to her touch, his gaze meeting hers in the chaos. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I'll do it. The murmurs turned to gasps. June clutched her arm as though she'd been struck. Emily. Emily lifted her chin. He chose me. I won't let him be sold. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then McCoy tipped his hat, his smile wicked. So be it. 1 week. Bitter Root Festival. The girl against the storm. That night, the Carter cabin was filled with arguments. June pleaded, her eyes wet, her voice breaking. You'll die, Em. That horse is wild. He's not a game. He's a danger. But Emily stood firm, her hands trembling as she held her grandfather's notebook. Grandpa didn't die for nothing. He left me this. He wanted me to listen. And Storm listened to me when no one else could. If I don't try, he'll be lost forever. Jack was quiet until the fire burned low. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. If she's going to do this, she'll need help. Not just from me, but from Evelyn, too. This isn't about breaking a horse. It's about proving a bond in front of the whole town. Emily pressed the notebook to her chest. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering like a voice half heard. She closed her eyes and whispered back, I won't let you down, Grandpa. Or you, Storm. The night before training began, the valley seemed unusually still. No coyotes called, no owls stirred the trees. The only sound was the wind slipping down from the Bitterroot peaks, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant snow. Emily sat alone on the porch steps of the cabin, her knees tucked to her chest, her grandfather's notebook open across her lap. The moonlight pooled over the pages, illuminating the rough sketches of ridgelines and water springs, the hurried notes scrawled in his familiar hand. June had gone to bed after another round of pleading, her voice ragged with fear. Jack had promised to meet them in the morning with Evelyn to begin training. For now, Emily was alone with the words her grandfather had left behind, words that felt less like ink on paper and more like whispers drawn out of the night itself. She traced the final entry with her fingertip. If I don't make it back, trust the mountains. The truth lies where the wind speaks. Her lips moved around the words, repeating them softly, until they became a prayer. The wind speaks, she murmured, closing her eyes. The night air brushed her cheek as if answering. And then she remembered. The last ride she had taken with him, months before he died. They had climbed into the high pasture, just the two of them, her small hands clutching the saddle horn, while his steady voice guided her. She remembered how he stopped at the ridge, pointed at the valley, and said, You hear that, Em? That's not silence. That's the land breathing. When you don't know where to go, listen to it. It'll never lead you wrong. Her throat tightened. tears pricking her eyes. She wished more than anything that he were there now, to tell her she wasn't foolish, to tell her she was strong enough. She pressed the silver charm at her neck, holding it so tightly it left an imprint in her palm. A gust of wind rustled the pages of the notebook, flipping it open to a sketch she hadn't noticed before. It was faint, drawn lightly in pencil, an outline of a horse, head bowed, mane flowing like smoke. Beneath it, in tiny letters, he had written, "The one who kneels is not conquered, but heard." Emily's breath caught. It was as though he had seen this moment long before it happened. Storm kneeling before her at the auction wasn't a miracle, wasn't chance. It was something deeper, a recognition that went beyond training, beyond ownership. She pressed her hand to the page. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew he'd find me." A sudden noise startled her, the faint creak of the porch boards. She turned quickly and found Evelyn standing in the shadows, her braid falling over one shoulder. She must have walked from her camp in the trees, silent as the wind itself. "You hear him too," Evelyn said gently, nodding toward the notebook. "Your grandfather. His words aren't gone, Emily. They live in you." Emily's tears spilled over, but she didn't look away. "I don't know if I can do it. McCoy wants me to fail. Reed wants me broken. What if I'm not enough?" Evelyn stepped closer, crouching until their eyes met. "Enough for who?" "For them. They will never see you. They will never see Storm. But he does. That horse saw you when no one else could. That's why he knelt. That's why he waits." Trust that Emily wiped her cheeks, her small shoulders squaring. "Then I'll try. I'll listen. I'll be what he needs." The wind picked up again, whistling softly through the pines. Evelyn tilted her head, listening, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Do you hear it?" she asked. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes. It's like he's here." They sat together until the candle in the window burned low, the night wrapping around them like a cloak. When Emily finally rose, clutching the notebook to her chest, she felt something she hadn't felt in days. Calm. Not certainty, not victory, but calm, as though the mountains themselves had whispered, "You are not alone." She stepped inside, laying the notebook carefully by her bedside. Storm was still in his pen, beaten and drugged, but she would meet him again soon. She would breathe like the wind. She would listen like her grandfather had taught her, and together they would face whatever waited at the festival. Before closing her eyes, she whispered into the dark, "I'll ride with you, Storm. Not to own you, but to stand beside you." And in the hush of the night, the wind answered. The morning of the Bitterroot Festival dawned bright and relentless, the sun climbing a cloudless sky as though determined to expose every secret, every fear. Banners snapped along Main Street, colored ribbons strung between storefronts. The smell of roasting meat and sweet corn filled the air, mingling with dust and sweat. From the mountains, a breeze carried the scent of pine, but it was quickly drowned by the sound of drums, fiddles, and the roar of the crowd. Emily walked beside her grandmother, her small hand swallowed in June's grip. Jack Nolan followed close, his jaw tight, his hat pulled low against the glare. Evelyn Greyhawk walked on Emily's other side, calm as stone, her braid gleaming silver in the sun. Together they pushed through the throng of townsfolk, neighbors, and strangers who had gathered from miles around. Everyone was here to see one thing: the girl and the wild horse. The fairgrounds had been transformed into a stage. The arena had been widened, its fences reinforced with new boards. Men sat on the rails, women perched on benches, children scrambled for the best view. At the center, Storm stood tethered, his coat gleaming black in the sunlight. His sides heaved, his ears flicked nervously at the roar of the crowd. Ropes bound his neck and legs, and Marcus Reed stood nearby, whip coiled, gray eyes watchful. When Emily saw Storm, her chest ached. He looked thinner, his body scarred from days of Reed's merciless training. Yet his gaze, when it found her across the arena, was alive, fierce, waiting. The crowd erupted as William McCoy strode onto the platform, his smile wide, his arms raised like a preacher about to deliver a sermon. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "today we witness the truth. They say this girl has power over a demon horse, that she can do what no grown man could. Well, I give her the chance to prove it. If she rides him today, the beast is hers. If not, he's mine, and by nightfall he'll be sold." Cheers thundered, though not all were joyful. Some jeered, others laughed, their voices sharp as knives. Bets were shouted, coins clinking in eager hands. June leaned down, her voice shaking. "You don't have to do this, Em. No one will blame you if you walk away." Emily's throat was dry, her heart slamming against her ribs. But she remembered her grandfather's words, Evelyn's lessons, Jack's steady faith. She looked up at her grandmother, her small face pale, but resolute. "If I walk away, Storm is gone. Grandpa wouldn't walk away." June's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her grip loosening. The announcer's voice rang out. "Step forward, Emily Carter." Emily let go of her grandmother's hand. She walked alone across the dirt, the silver charm bouncing lightly at her chest, the crowd's roar fading into a low hum like the wind in her ears. Storm's gaze followed her, his head tossing, his body straining against the ropes. Reed smirked, muttering something to McCoy. When Emily stepped into the arena, the world stilled. She drew a long breath, then another, her shoulders rising and falling slowly. Evelyn's voice echoed in her memory. Through breath, through calm. Answer him with silence. She raised her hand. "Let him go." Reed's laugh was cruel. "He'll crush you." Emily didn't flinch. "Let him go." For a moment, McCoy hesitated. He saw the anticipation in the crowd, the hunger for spectacle. He gave a sharp nod. The ropes were cut, and Storm exploded into motion. The stallion reared, his scream tearing through the arena. Dust flew in clouds as his hooves pounded, his body a storm of black fire and muscle. The crowd gasped, some cheering, some crying out in fear. Reed stepped back, his whip ready, but McCoy raised a hand. "No. Let her handle it." Emily stood perfectly still, her hands open at her sides. Her breath flowed steady, matching the rhythm she could almost feel thrumming in Storm's chest. He circled her once, twice, mane whipping, nostrils flared. "Easy," she whispered, though her voice was lost to the noise. "It's me." The third time he circled, he slowed. His great head lowered slightly, his ears flicking forward. The crowd leaned in, hushed. Emily took one step forward. The dust settled. Storm stopped. For a heartbeat, the arena was silent except for the wind. Then Emily raised her small hand and touched his muzzle. The stallion exhaled a deep, shuddering breath, lowering his head until it nearly brushed the dirt. The crowd erupted. Cheers, gasps, cries of disbelief. But Emily heard none of it. She pressed her forehead against Storm's, whispering so softly only he could hear. "We can do this." Together. Behind her, McCoy's smile faltered. His eyes darkened as he realized this was no trick, no accident. Something was happening that he could not control. The announcer's voice rang out again, almost drowned by the roar of the crowd. "Mount him, Emily." "Show us." Emily closed her eyes, drawing strength from the wind, from her grandfather's whispers, from the trust blazing in Storm's eyes. She stepped toward his flank, ready to climb. The test had begun. The crowd held its breath as Emily placed her small hands on Storm's side. The stallion shifted beneath her touch, his muscles quivering with tension, yet he did not bolt. Dust swirled at their feet, golden in the sunlight. For a long moment, the arena was silent except for the pounding of hooves from horses tied along the rails and the restless shuffle of men waiting for the storm to break. Emily pressed her foot against Storm's flank, searching for a way up. She was small, but determination made her movements sure. With a sudden leap, she pulled herself onto his back, gripping his mane for balance. The crowd gasped as one, a sound like a wave crashing against rocks. Storm froze. His ears flicked back, his body coiled. For a heartbeat, Emily thought he might throw her, hurl her into the dirt before everyone. She closed her eyes, leaning forward, whispering into his mane. "It's me. Just me. We're together." The stallion's breath came fast, hot against her leg, but then his body shifted, settling. With a snort, he lifted his head high, his hooves striking the earth. And then he moved, first a slow, deliberate walk, then a trot, then a sudden burst into a gallop that shook the ground. The arena erupted. Some cheered wildly, others shouted in disbelief, wagers lost and won in the same instant. Emily clung tight, not with fear, but with trust. Storm's stride was powerful yet fluid, carrying her as though she weighed nothing. The wind tore at her hair, and for the first time in her life, she felt not like a child, but like a rider born from the mountains themselves. Reed's face twisted with rage, his whip raised as if to strike, but the townsfolk surged forward, blocking him. Jack Nolan's voice rang out above the chaos. "Let her ride." "You've all seen it. She's not forcing him. He chose her." McCoy, red-faced, tried to shout over the noise. "This proves nothing. A trick, that's all." But Evelyn Greyhawk stepped onto the platform, her presence commanding silence. She held up Carter's notebook, the worn leather cover visible to all. "This is no trick," she declared, her voice steady. "This is legacy." Carter found the truth about the land McCoy stole. He wrote it down for his family, for his granddaughter. "And now, in front of all of you, I'll show you." She opened the notebook to the sketch of the north pasture, pointing to the markings. "Here lies the underground spring, the water McCoy wanted for himself." He knew, and to keep it hidden, he silenced Carter. "That's the truth your valley deserves." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs spread like fire, murder, theft, betrayal. Men who had once backed McCoy exchanged uneasy glances, their faith shaken. McCoy stormed down from the platform, his voice raw. "Lies! All lies! That old fool fell from the ridge, nothing more." But then Jack spoke, his voice cutting sharp. "I was the one who examined Carter's body. His injuries weren't from a fall. They were from a struggle. You pushed him, McCoy, or you had your men do it." A hush fell. All eyes turned to McCoy. His face darkened, sweat glistening on his brow. For the first time, his grin faltered. Emily, still astride Storm, raised her voice. "You wanted to break him like you wanted to break Storm. But you couldn't. He left the truth behind, and you can't silence it anymore." Storm reared, his hooves flashing in the sun, a cry ripping from his throat that echoed across the mountains. The crowd roared in response, not fear this time, but fury, outrage, vindication. Men surged forward, shouting for justice. Women clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers of thanks that the truth had finally been spoken aloud. Reed tried to grab Storm's reins, but the stallion spun away, his power unchained. Emily clung tightly, guiding him not with force, but with trust. They circled the arena once more. The image of girl and horse burned into every eye. "Enough!" McCoy bellowed, his voice cracking under the weight of the crowd. But it was too late. The tide had turned. Evelyn lifted her hand high, notebook raised like a banner. "This land belongs to its people. This horse belongs to no one. And this girl, this child, has done what no man here dared. She has listened." The crowd erupted again, this time with chants. "Justice! Justice!" The sheriff, pale and sweating, stepped forward reluctantly, his hand hovering over the cuffs at his belt. McCoy's eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, for any shred of control left. But there was none. Emily leaned low over Storm's neck, her lips pressed to his mane. "We did it," she whispered. "We showed them." Storm tossed his head, his hooves striking sparks from the earth as if answering. The truth was no longer hidden. It was alive, roaring through the valley like thunder. The festival ground trembled beneath the uproar. Shouts of "Justice! Justice!" thundered against the mountains, echoing across the valley. Emily sat astride Storm, his mane whipping against her cheek as the stallion pawed the earth, answering the people's cries with his own fierce call. William McCoy stood in the center of it all, his face twisted with rage and fear. He raised his hands, trying to silence the crowd, but the tide had turned. No grin, no gold, no threat could smother the truth now. The sheriff pushed his way forward, sweat dripping down his temples, his eyes darting between McCoy and the people. He hesitated, his hand trembling on the cuffs at his belt. McCoy snarled, pointing at him. "Don't just stand there. Arrest them. Arrest her." But the sheriff didn't move. He looked to the crowd, neighbors he'd known his whole life, men and women whose eyes burned with betrayal. Then his gaze landed on Emily, a child on the back of a stallion that refused to bow. Slowly, he shook his head. "I can't protect you anymore, Bill," he said. Gasps rippled. McCoy's face purpled. "You coward! You'd side with them? With a child?" Jack Nolan stepped forward, his voice hard. "With the truth!" Evelyn Greyhawk raised the notebook high, her voice ringing like a bell. "You cannot bury water, McCoy. You cannot bury the mountains, and you cannot bury a man's honor." The crowd surged closer. Men climbed down from the rails. Women pulled their children back, but stayed firm, their eyes locked on McCoy. Reed tried to slip away through the chaos, his whip still at his side, but Storm reared, blocking his path. The stallion's scream ripped through the air, and Reed stumbled backward, tripping over his own boots. Emily leaned forward, her small hand resting against Storm's neck. She could feel his power thrumming beneath her, not as something to control, but as something shared. "Don't hurt him," she whispered. He's not worth it. Storm snorted, stamping the earth, but he stilled, his gaze fixed on Reed with a fury that needed no lash to command respect. Reed turned pale, dropped his whip, and fled into the crowd, swallowed by the voices of people who would never forget. McCoy's bravado crumbled. He reached for his pocket watch, his hat, anything to cling to. But his empire was dust. The sheriff finally stepped forward, steel glinting in his hand. "William McCoy, you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and suspicion of murder." The words rang out clear, and the crowd erupted once more, not in chaos, but in triumph. Some wept, others shouted. Neighbors who had once kept silent now stood tall, their voices united. Emily's grandmother pushed through the throng, tears streaming down her face. She looked up at her granddaughter, still on Storm's back, and for the first time in years, her voice trembled, not with fear, but with pride. "You did it, Em. You brought the truth home." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes shining. "We did it," she said softly, stroking Storm's mane. "Me and him. And Grandpa." The stallion reared once more, his hooves flashing against the sky, his cry echoing like thunder across the valley. The people roared with him, their anger transformed into something larger. Hope. That night, fires lit the streets of Bitterroot, not in destruction, but in celebration. Lanterns swung from porches, music poured from fiddles, and neighbors gathered to speak freely for the first time in years. The Carter name, once weighed down by loss, was spoken with reverence. Emily sat outside the cabin with Storm grazing quietly nearby, his black coat glistening in the firelight. Jack sat on the steps, Evelyn beside him, and June rocking slowly in her chair. For the first time, there was peace in the air. But Emily knew the fight was not just about Storm or her family. It was about the valley itself, about the people who had found their voices. The fire of justice burned not in the lanterns or the music, but in the hearts of everyone who had stood together. She leaned her head against Storm's neck, whispering so softly only he could hear. "We're free. All of us." The stallion flicked his ears, as if he understood. The valley was quiet in the days after McCoy's arrest. The festival stalls were taken down, the music faded, and the dust settled back over Bitterroot's streets. Life resumed its slow rhythm, but something in the air had changed. People walked taller, spoke freer, as though a weight long carried had finally been lifted. For Emily, the world felt both bigger and smaller at once. Bigger, because she had stood before an entire town and proven that truth could not be broken. Smaller, because every moment now seemed tied to the bond she shared with Storm. Wherever she went, his presence lingered, whether grazing by the Carter cabin, his dark figure, outlined against the golden fields, or running free with the wind tangling his mane. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the valley in amber, Emily sat on the old fence post near their cabin. Storm stood nearby, his head lowered, grazing quietly. The silver charm her grandfather had given her glinted against her chest, warm from the day's heat. She turned it between her fingers, remembering the words in his notebook. "The one who kneels is not conquered, but heard." Her grandmother stepped onto the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. For once, There was no fear in her eyes, only a tired kind of peace. "Your grandfather would be proud," June said softly. Emily looked up, her voice small but steady. "Do you think he knows?" June smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Oh, he knows. He's in the wind, in the water, in that horse. He never left you, Em. He never will." Storm lifted his head then, as if he'd heard the words. His ears pricked, his eyes fixed on Emily, and in that moment she felt it too. The presence of her grandfather, the whisper of the mountains, the truth that had carried them through. The following week, the sheriff and a group of townsfolk came to the Carter cabin. They carried papers signed by the county judge, returning the north pasture to the Carter family. It was not just land, it was justice restored. The spring her grandfather had fought to protect would now serve the valley, not McCoy's greed. But Emily knew Storm did not belong to her. Not truly. He belonged to the wild, to the mountains where he had been born, and though he stayed close these days, sleeping in the pasture by the cabin, she knew the call of freedom still echoed in his veins. One night, as the stars blazed bright above the Bitterroot, Storm grew restless. He paced the fence line, his head tossing, nostrils flaring at the scent of the wind. Emily slipped outside in her nightdress, barefoot on the cool grass. She approached him slowly, laying her small hand on his muzzle. "You want to go," she whispered. "I can feel it." Storm blew softly against her cheek, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. Emily pressed her forehead against his, fighting the lump rising in her throat. "It's all right. You don't have to stay for me. You gave me strength when I needed it. Now I'll give you freedom." She unclipped the rope that hung loosely from his halter and stepped back. Storm hesitated for a heartbeat, then lifted his head high, mane streaming in the night breeze. With a powerful surge, he leapt the fence, his hooves pounding the earth as he galloped toward the mountains. Emily stood frozen, tears streaking her cheeks as she watched him disappear into the shadows of the ridgeline. The silence afterward was deep, almost unbearable. But then, faint and distant, came the sound of hooves echoing across the valley, a cry that rolled down from the peaks like thunder. Emily's heart soared. He was not gone. He was where he belonged. Days passed, and life at the Carter cabin settled into a new rhythm. Emily helped her grandmother plant the garden, carried water from the spring, and spent her evenings reading her grandfather's notebook by the fire. Storm did not return every night, but sometimes, at dawn or dusk, she would hear him. Sometimes she would see him, a dark shape against the ridge, watching before melting back into the wild. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and violet, Emily climbed the fence again, her silver charm warm against her chest. She looked toward the mountains and whispered, "We're free, Storm." Both of us. And as the wind stirred the grass, a dark stallion appeared briefly on the horizon, mane streaming, his cry carried on the breeze. Emily smiled through her tears. The story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. Written in the land, the wind, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and a wild horse. And now, I want to hear from you. If you believe Storm was meant to be free, drop a simple 0 in the comments. If you believe he was destined to stay with Emily, type 1. Your voice matters. Don't forget to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. More unforgettable stories of humans and animals are waiting for you in the next video.